Caregiving can sometimes feel like an impossible struggle. Caregivers may be torn between taking care of loved ones and trying to maintain balance in life. The good news is that it doesn't have to be that way. The Caring Generation with host Pamela D. Wilson is here to focus on the conversation of caring. You're not alone. In fact, you're in exactly the right place to share stories and learn tips and resources to help you and your loved ones. So now, please welcome the host of The Caring Generation, Pamela D. Wilson.
This is Pamela D. Wilson, caregiving expert, speaker, consultant, and guardian of the Caring Generation. The Caring Generation focuses on the conversation of caring, giving us permission to talk about aging, the challenges of caregiving, and everything in between. It's no surprise that needing care or becoming a caregiver changes everything. The Caring Generation is here to guide you along the journey, to let you know that you're not alone. You are in exactly the right place to share stories and learn about caregiving programs, information, and resources to help you and your loved ones plan for what's ahead. Invite your parents, spouses, family, friends, colleagues, coworkers, and everyone you know to listen to the show. It's available on podcast apps worldwide. There are links to these podcast apps on my website, PamelaDWilson.com. If you have a question or an idea for a future program, share your idea with me by commenting on my social media posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the videos that I place on YouTube, my LinkedIn channel. You can also go to my website, PamelaDWilson.com, click on the Contact Me button, and complete my caregiver survey to tell me your story. This week on the program, we are on episode 170. This episode concludes my 4th year of doing this podcast. The next podcast that you hear, episode 171, will begin year number 5. So, this week, we're talking about 2 ideas that came from caregivers relating to the duty and responsibility of caregiving. The first is the loss of identity that caregivers experience when too many responsibilities become all-encompassing as a result of caring for another person. The second idea also relates to having too many responsibilities. It's the mindset of being super vigilant or hyper responsible. Some caregivers become less concerned about their own welfare. They ignore self-care. Instead, they worry about not taking care of a loved one or their efforts possibly causing harm. They also tend to take responsibility for things that aren't their fault, things they cannot possibly control, like a loved one being diagnosed with a health condition, or being unable to do things that they used to do, or refusing to do things that are good for them. Do either of these too many responsibility situations sound like you or anyone you know? If so, stay with me for an in-depth conversation about having too many responsibilities, how this happens, and what you can do about it. Know that it's easy to fall into these types of situations because caregivers want to be helpful. And it's not only caregivers that experience identity loss, such that they become totally immersed, totally buried in other parts of life. Anyone can become lost in being a parent, immersed in a career, or focused on a hobby to the exclusion of other events and people in your life. Now, there are instances where people believe that something that they do is their path in life, or it's a passion they can't avoid. These are not the situations we're discussing in this podcast specific to being a caregiver. That's a whole nother story. And I'll use myself as an example of becoming involved in caregiving. I became involved in the field of professional caregiving in 1999 due to years of prior circumstances where I was a caregiver for aging parents and other family members. Now, I took the business experience I had pre-caregiving when I was managing consumer product brands like Orowheat, Thomas English Muffins, Entenmann's, Healthy Choice, products that you may buy in the grocery store today. And I translated this business experience and knowledge into being a business owner in the caregiving and healthcare field. And through this experience, because I became legally and financially responsible for the health and financial affairs of my clients, I built upon the personal experience that I had caring for my parents and other family members. Throughout the years since 1999, I experienced firsthand the degree of hypersensitivity that caregivers have with the sound of a ringing cell phone. I used to imagine my cell phone ringing during the night, and honestly, there were times when it did because there was a client emergency that I had to deal with. I've experienced every emotion, the ups, the downs, the good, the bad, that family caregivers experienced through my personal and professional caregiving experiences. And even more importantly, it was my responsibility to train my staff, who were caregivers and care managers, how to respond to these emotional challenges so that they could focus on doing their jobs, caring for our clients who were family caregivers, elderly, and disabled persons. Now, this training meant learning not to take their personal problems into the home of a client and sharing them, which would create more worry for the client, place a burden on the client. Clients shouldn't have to worry about their caregivers. It's the other way around. It also meant, though, learning to set firm boundaries between responsibilities while with a client and life outside of paid caregiving positions. Now, I know many caregivers who did worry about the health and welfare of their clients during non-working hours. I did this myself, but I learned how to set boundaries. If you're a family caregiver, you know that these are difficult boundaries to set. It can take time and repetition to train the brain where one's responsibilities end and the responsibilities of another person, the person you may be caring for, begin. If you're a family caregiver who's still working, this is similar to the idea of leaving your personal life outside of work so that during the day, you are there 100% for your job. Although, this becomes challenging when aging parents call you at work or when you need to make calls to set doctor appointments or coordinate other care activities. Let's relate this too many responsibilities to the idea of losing an identity. So many caregivers tell me that they don't remember the person they were before caregiving because all of their activities and their habits have changed so much. It's like a door shuts and another door opens, or some type of an event, like a loved one having a health emergency, changes life overnight or in an instant. The old life is gone, and it's time to change up everything to care for a loved one. Individuals who find it easier to manage this type of major life change and identity shift tend to be people who can find a way to explain or manage through the event and link a past life to a current life. Now, this does not always mean that individuals are happy about the change, but they accept it. This can mean that they find a way to think about and rationalize the events of what is happening and what has to happen in the future. So, for example, a spouse who gives up their full-time job to care for a spouse who had a stroke and now needs 100% total care. The story may go like this. Caring for my spouse is my responsibility, and it's a priority. So it made perfect sense to walk away from my career to be with my husband or wife full time so that he or she can recover more quickly from this health event. That's a story that almost everybody can agree with, right? Now, on the other hand, there may be spouses who say, I'm keeping my job and my career. I'm choosing to place my husband or wife in a care community where he or she can get the care that I cannot provide. Instead, I'm going to remain the sole financial support for my spouse and myself because it's unlikely that my spouse is going to be able to return to any type of paid work and life goes on. We have to retire. We're going to have more health care expenses. We have a house to maintain. That, too, is a story that almost anyone can agree with. So for an event that turns life topsy-turvy, coming up with a story that supports the needs of the situation is helpful to the person who is most affected by the change. Many times, supporting the needs of another person or the needs of children or a family is enough of a story to help manage the emotions of this unexpected transition. So this is the transition into being a caregiver. The transition out of caregiving, making a plan to end caregiving, can be more challenging because it may involve dealing with the death of a spouse or a loved one. Now, changes also occur when the role of caregiving becomes all-encompassing, and then one day you wake up and all those daily routines and responsibilities have disappeared. I want to share a poem that a caregiver placed on a video on my YouTube channel today about grief and loss and caring for a mother with dementia. Here it goes. I had to find a place to vent. Mama just passed and I am so lost. I miss you, Mama. Right now we would be sharing time when there were no words. I spent the past 6 years with you every day. We were a great team. You were adorable. I enjoyed really getting to know you, and it broke my heart watching you leave. I watched the television shows you watched, and I can still hear you yelling at the TV. I remember you dumped iced tea on Brenda in the closet. You loved to hate her, laughing and clapping your little hands to Golden Girls. It was a hard journey for you. Moments of clarity were the worst at times. My goal was to make sure your end was happier than your beginning. And it was. You smiled a lot, had loads of fun. I spoiled you rotten, but you had to go. Friends were waiting on you. And I am here trying to pull it together. And to top it off, remember Janice, Mama? My 17-year-old basset hound? She got run over the other day, Mama. It was horrible. So I miss you both. Maybe she's with you. I hope so. I love you. So when caregivers give up their prior lives, like the person who wrote this poem, and their identities related to work or career, the identity of being a friend, of having a social life, self-care activities like exercise, hobbies, sometimes marriages and relationships with children, it can feel very difficult to start all over from ground zero when you make comparisons. Basically, as a caregiver, you may have given up everything and everyone in your life to the exclusion of the person that you care for. Now, you might wonder, does this really happen? I can tell you that it does, but to differing degrees, depending on the care level and the time needs of the person who needs care. If you live with the person you care for, maintaining your identity can be even more challenging because your time may not seem like your own, and you may have no personal time and no personal space. Successful caregivers who are on 24/7 duty, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, make time for themselves by having other people come to care for their loved one several days a week. Now, this may not be possible for everyone, depending on where you live, the costs of hiring a caregiver, access to public programs like Medicaid or long-term support services that can provide a caregiver, or access to other low or no-cost programs. And if you're in a situation where you've already given up many of your connections, you may think, well, I have nothing to do with my free time. How am I going to rebuild a life? Which means that you must really make an effort to venture out, to meet new people, establish new relationships, new habits, and new patterns. This can take time. It won't happen overnight. So if you're a caregiver who has given up your identity and you want to get your old self back or create a new self, start now, because the process really can take months or years. Better yet, if you are very early in the caregiving stages, don't give up your identity, your career, your friends, social activities, your spouse or your children, or your health. Fight with everything you have to not allow too many responsibilities related to caring for others to take over your life. Know that other people will tell you that caring for others, it's a blessing, it's a duty, it's a life purpose. It can be, but it's not a positive experience for everyone. Mostly people who say this are looking in from the outside and judging caregivers who maybe they're siblings or family members. And as you know, it's usually these people, siblings, other people, who are too busy to help, but they're great giving advice. They don't have time to help. They push all the responsibilities on you because you were the one to jump in feet first into the identity of that caregiver. Let's take a break and we'll come back to talk about hyper-responsible caregivers, how this happens, why it happens, and what you can do to reverse the path of having too many responsibilities. I'm Pamela D. Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. This is episode number 170. Visit my website, PamelaDWilson.com, to access my online caregiving program, How to Care for Aging Parents. Now over 170 episodes of the Caring Generation podcast, going into its 5th year. My caregiver library, links to my online support group on Facebook called The Caregiving Trap, and to videos on my YouTube channel, which is Pamela D. Wilson, Caregiving Expert. Over 800 videos are there answering questions that caregivers ask. Stay with me. I'll be right back with more of the good stuff. This is Pamela D. Wilson, Caregiving Expert. Visit my website, PamelaDWilson.com, for tips, caregiver support, articles, the Caring Generation podcasts, online caregiver education programs, access to videos, and so much more. There's something for caregivers and aging adults interested in health, well-being, family relationships, other aspects of caregiving at PamelaDWilson.com. In this part of the program, we're going to continue to talk about too many responsibilities, how this happens, and what you can do to regain your identity. Continuing for a moment on the idea of identity loss, there are instances where it's much easier to focus on the problems and life circumstances of another person to take the focus off one's problems. Some caregivers bury themselves in the care of another person on purpose so that they can ignore situations they created in their own lives that are problems. This can be harmful for the caregiver and the person needing care. It can be a sign of a codependent relationship where the caregiver is only happy when making extreme sacrifices, like losing an identity, giving up a job, moving into the home of a parent to become a full-time caregiver, and so on. Feeling needed as a caregiver by the person that one cares for becomes more important than anything else in life. The challenge is that the caregiver gives up their self-esteem, their confidence, and all possibility of living an independent life unless they recognize the habit and find a way to regain their identity and their life. So now let's talk about the second idea about having too much responsibility. There is a link between wanting to control everything in life, yet feeling that everything is out of control, so that a person, the caregiver, creates habits to check and double aspects that may relate to safety or health, or take action to reduce the possibility of something bad happening. The desire to control or feel responsible for others can be a preoccupation or an obsession. It can become obsessive compulsive behavior or be derived from that. Dealing with too many responsibilities can become a full-time occupation of caregivers, really in anyone, right? Those for whom people feel too responsible is a preoccupation that can result in constant worry about what other people feel or think. Caregivers can become preoccupied with the actions of others, what they're doing or not doing, what they think of the caregiver. For example, an aging parent who the doctor recommends exercise, who is not exercising. Or maybe a diet recommendation was made to avoid certain foods and mom and dad continue to eat high fat, high cholesterol, high sugar, high salt foods, and their health is getting worse. So these caregivers can nag and become obsessed about the behaviors of the people that they care for that they really can't control. The even bigger challenge is that this caregiver somehow feels responsible for the fact that mom and dad continue not to exercise, refuse to eat a better diet, and follow health recommendations. So in a sense, the caregiver has lost the concept and the meaning of personal responsibility, which means I control my actions, other people control their actions and what they take responsibility for. Everyone then experiences the results of their actions. If a parent has heart disease and is overweight, there was likely a cause and effect relationship somewhere. Maybe mom or dad suffered a physical injury that complicated all their health. Or maybe they were never physically active and they always relied on fast food or junk food for meals, and that caused their health problems today. Admittedly, there is a general widespread lack of health education, health prevention, and things that lead to health risks. Now, personal responsibility can't be totally ignored because we all have access to education and information. But for caregivers who have obsessive compulsive tendencies, take on too many responsibilities, all of this can become really a stressful, emotional daily nightmare where there's always too much to do. Others are never satisfied. They only criticize and complain. And something bad is sure to happen. If not today, then tomorrow. So if you are a caregiver in any of these situations, what can you do to create a new identity and to throw too many responsibilities out the door and into the past? Let's start with how to regain an identity. I'm going to make the assumption that you maintained employment during your caregiving years. If this is the case, you're going to have a slightly easier transition away from being a caregiver because you maintained some type of routine of self-care. While you may not see continuing to be employed as self-care, it is because you maintained some sense of self-esteem, confidence, and the ability to remain financially self-sufficient, or maybe mostly so. Caregivers who give up employment don't realize how hard it is to get back into the job market. I was corresponding with a caregiver this week who has been out of the workforce for years caring for a spouse. Now, if any of you have searched for a job since COVID, you know that online employment applications are the way to find a job today. Resumes must make it past these bots, BOTS, which are computer programs that look for experience and skills that are identified by keywords. And this happens before your resume even makes it to a real person. Interviews today are more often online than in person, and work. It can be remote instead of going to an office location, which can be a plus for people who enjoy working independently and don't want to relocate, and even for family caregivers who have limited responsibilities. The world of work and the skills required to stay current in the job market are constantly changing. So, assuming a caregiver has a job and is recreating an identity, steps include identifying meaningful activities that do not relate to work, that do not relate to caregiving. And I'll share some examples for myself of things that I've been involved in over the years. Volunteering is a great way to meet people and to feel good about your contributions to a cause or the life of another person. Some of the top websites for volunteering include volunteermatch.org, unitedway.org, americorps.gov, theredcross.org, volunteer.gov, dosomething.org, and Volunteers of America, which is voa.org. Plus, know that you can contact any company or any organization that you have an interest in and ask if they have volunteer programs. Obviously, you want to volunteer for an organization or a cause that supports an interest or a passion that you have. On the other hand, there is also a huge need for individuals to serve on the board of directors of nonprofit organizations. I've also did this for many organizations over the years. If you have time and energy, it really can be easier than you think to find a project you enjoy that reestablishes your identity, that combines the ability to meet new people and make new friends. If volunteering or being on a board of directors is not a fit for you, then identify hobbies. Crafting, gardening, a sports activity, or something else that you'd like to do, or an activity that you did before you had too many responsibilities in the realm of being a caregiver. You may want to spend time with family, friends, grandchildren, or social groups. Maybe those are on your list. These activities can help you reestablish that identity separate from work. In any type of transition to or from caregiving, know that there can be a lot of emotional hurdles that one experiences. If you're a caregiver who experienced the loss of a spouse or an aging parent, you may have months of transition before you are ready to reestablish an identity. For example, if you're the executor or the trustee of the estate, you may have to clean out a house, sell out a house, or have responsibilities for other belongings. If other family members are involved, this can take a year, 2 years, 3 years more. So in a sense, while you may not still be providing hands-on care or daily care, you may still feel that you have too many responsibilities to be able to move forward with your life. So in a sense, you're stuck in limbo. You may also be dealing with feelings of grief or loss. You may feel isolated or alone. There are so many emotions to deal with when change is voluntary or it happens because of circumstances that are beyond our control. The most complicated aspect of transitioning through changes can be managing what's between our ears, our mindset, and the tendency of the brain to focus on worry or negative consequences. Although there can be a tipping point of finding peace in very uncertain times. This can happen by recognizing that a person is discomfort or uncomfortable with uncertainty and learning to just kind of sit with the idea that you really have no control over what happens tomorrow and you can't control outside circumstances. So while we may think that we control our lives, something as simple as a fall or a change in health that likely led us to becoming a caregiver can happen to any one of us any time in the next 10 minutes, 30 minutes, overnight, or tomorrow. So, the go-to remedy for too many responsibilities and working through uncertainty is to focus only on what you can control, which mainly is your mindset and the way you think about situations and your responses to daily events and circumstances. Now, recognize that there can also be this tendency to gravitate to people in similar situations when uncertainty exists. This can be a very positive aspect in a situation where a caregiver finds a support group and seeks the experiences of others in similar situations. Or if you're looking for a job, you go find a career counselor. If you want to become healthy, you go find a trainer, things like that. However, you can also, because you're vulnerable and you might be feeling lonely and isolated, you can be pulled into negative situations where you end up in a group of people who think very differently from you, maybe radically, or they espouse some type of extreme habits. So it's important not to make overnight changes immediately when you're moving through any type of transition or working to reestablish your identity. Take your time. Be practical and methodical. Do your research. Investigate your options and create a plan of action. These are likely skills that you gained and exhibited during your caregiving years, or at least I hope you did. With all of the challenges posed by caring for another person, there are many skills gained and a lot of learning that happens when you are a caregiver. And at the point where you realize that the effects of doing too much are not good for your life, things like, let me give you a few examples: irregular sleep patterns, mood swings, feeling depressed, feeling overwhelmed, not eating or eating too much, losing or gaining weight, not exercising, neglecting relationships, worrying about your job performance, having difficulties establishing boundaries and saying no, losing confidence and self-esteem, or turning to substances. When you recognize this, you can decide to flip the switch to make different choices and create a new identity and to change your caregiving relationships. Begin saying no to activities that feel burdensome or exhausting. Say yes to activities that inspire you and make you happy and feel good. Create happy spaces and happy moments in every day of your life. Recognize your mood swings and your negative reactions to other people and other situations. Give yourself time to identify why you feel the way you do, so that you can work through these emotions and find a better, smoother path forward. As you begin to regain solid footing and create a new identity, you can look back at how far you've come, which I will tell you will be a long way. Give yourself credit, pat yourself on the back for working through challenging times and coming out on the other side to create a new you that you can be proud of. These intentional changes and actions that you take are something that nobody else can initiate for you. Once you identify what you want your daily life to look like, your relationships to look like, and your experiences to look like, you have to be the one to make that plan. Dream a little dream, dream a big dream. But whatever you do, take the next steps to create the life you want, to end a life of too many responsibilities, to create a new identity, and be the person that you've always dreamed of. This is Pamela D. Wilson, caregiving expert, on episode 170 of The Caring Generation. I look forward to being with you again soon. God bless you all, sending love and light to everyone. Sleep well tonight. Have a fabulous day tomorrow, and enjoy each day until we are here together again.
Tune in each week for The Caring Generation with host Pamela D. Wilson. Come join the conversation and see how Pamela can provide solutions and peace of mind for everyone. Here on Pamela D. Wilson's The Caring Generation.